Hello and welcome to this recording then of a breakdown of how the transactional writing is assessed with a focus on letters. This is for paper 1, section B of the English language GCSE. Let's start by looking then at the marking criteria, which goes from band 1 all the way up to band 5. Band 1 and band 2 is likely to be where your grade 1, 2 and 3 is going to come from. As you can see, there are two columns. The one on the left is for communication and organisation, and the one on the right is for sentence structure and punctuation. Please take a bit of time then just to pause this video to look through this in more detail. You can now see the marking criteria for the grade 5 all the way up to grade 9. If we focus on band 3 then, about halfway up the mark scheme, that's likely to be where your pass mark comes from. You'll notice there are bullet points there that clearly dictate what the exam board are looking for. There should be a clear understanding of the purpose of the task you've been set, an awareness of the target audience you are using, and the appropriate register or formality for what you are doing. You need to ensure then that the writing that your exam answer you do matches the purpose and audience of the task you are set. There should be organisation of ideas, normally in paragraphs, and there should be shape and structure. This is indicating then they're looking for an introduction, around about 2 main paragraphs, and a conclusion of some kind. On the right hand side you can see they specify to get the pass mark a variety of sentence structure. Those are your short, compound and complex sentences. A range of punctuation is used mostly accurately, which means they will allow you some mistakes, but the majority of the work should be punctuated correctly, and most spelling is accurate. They'll forgive 1 or 2 spellings linked to slightly more complicated words, but in general there shouldn't be any more than around 2 spelling mistakes per paragraph. So that then tells you clearly what skills you need to pass this exam. Let's take a close look then at exactly how this will be graded. You can see they ask at the beginning there that remind you at the beginning you're assessed for quality of your writing skills. For each question, 12 marks are awarded for communication and organisation, and a further 8 marks are awarded for vocab, sentence structure, punctuation, and of course spelling. They give you an idea of roughly how long your answer should be, 300 to 400 words per task, which is around about 1.5 to 2 sides of the average size handwriting. You can see an example there of a task, and in this case it is a letter writing task. Please take a look at this question. And what you need to do in the exam is identify who the target audience are, what the purpose is of the writing or the topic is of your writing, and the form you're being asked to write in. In this case, a letter, and the exam board have put that in bold to make clear the format they're asking for. You can see the number of marks in total is 20 marks, and that number is given in brackets at the bottom. When the exam boards reply to schools, they give an idea of roughly what they'd be looking for in a successful answer, before also dictating what they'd be looking for in a weaker response. These are kind of the informal skills indicators they'd expect to see in any student's work. You can see the first bullet point there indicates they're looking for a formal letter in the exam answer or the exam task you just saw. They're looking for clear understanding of a letter and letter conventions. So things like addresses, dear sir or madam, and yours sincerely or yours faithfully at the bottom would be there in the better answers that they received. They're also looking for an understanding of intended audience. They'd be looking for links to a headmaster or headmistress in the task you just saw, and how the candidate or the student has responded to that audience in a particularly good way. They would look at a number of arguments presented, so they look at how many points you make linked to the task set, and they'd be looking at your overall structure and the sequence of how you've gone about it. In simple terms, have you got an introduction, then a firstly, secondly, and a concluding statement? Higher answers might also involve a counter-argument. What would somebody else say in response to the task? And how could that be overcome? You can see they've specified that paragraphs use effectively to structure the response, and they give direction to the overall argument. That's perhaps a nod to the fact they would look for a short opening paragraph and then some detailed middle paragraphs before a short conclusive statement. They would give a range of appropriate, well-selected details. So rather than a list of bullet points, they're expected to make a point and then explain it in some depth. For AO6, vocab sentence structure, they're looking for controlled expression of ideas. In other words, sentences that seem to elaborate when necessary, but equally are short, sharp, and to the point when needed too. They specify few, if any, errors are made, and tenses are consistent. Vocab is used precisely and appropriately. They're not looking for the most fancy words in the world, but they are looking for vocab that suits the formality of the task. So in this case, a vocab that's sort of mid-range, that's suited to talking to a headmaster or headmistress. If we now look at what's needed for a less successful response, you can see immediately a short or thin or brief response is frowned upon by the exam board. There are errors in terms of layout and the register and purpose being given. This might be a candidate then that goes off task relatively quickly in their response, or equally have forgotten the fact that they should use addresses and dear sir or madam at the beginning of a letter. In a weaker response, they see a limited sense of intended audience. Perhaps they're speaking there more as if they're talking to a friend than the headmistress. And they also specify they probably expect to see something more like bullet points or a range of very short paragraphing in a more basic response. Looking down at AO6, you can see there'd be lots of errors in a limited response. The tense might change and be inconsistent, and the vocab is what might be seen as very, very basic or simplistic for a GCSE response. Now we're going to start to look at a range of examples, ranging from the lower grades up to the higher ones. We'll start with this response here then, and immediately we can see it is in the form of a letter. It's got some errors in spelling and punctuation, the exam board have pointed out there, but it does fulfill the purpose and target audience. You can see its sequence with the word firstly and a comma in paragraph 2, and clearly paragraph 1 is a lot shorter than paragraph 2. It uses basic rhetorical questions in the middle of paragraph 2 there, but doesn't really use a full range of punctuation as you read further into this answer. Moving on further into this response, you can see they've definitely sequenced their work. You remember firstly was used in the last paragraph, that's followed up with secondly in the third paragraph. And you can see there are some commas used correctly in some of those sentences. Once more, rhetorical questions are used, but this isn't being overly clever. Still, I'm looking for a range of punctuation and finding it quite lacking. As we now scroll down and begin to look at the bottom of the response, you can see a reference to the target audience, the head teacher, and you can see a slightly more informal way of speaking creeping in there in the last couple of sentences. As we now get to the end of this letter, we can see it ends with a conclusive statement that's around about 2 to 3 sentences long and appeals again directly to the head teacher. It ends the way you'd expect a letter to, even though the spelling is a little bit off. So yes, there are some errors here. There's some grammatical errors, there are 1 or 2 spelling mistakes, there's 1 or 2 apostrophes missing. But overall, the exam board found there's awareness of intended audience, points to support opinions have some development, and sentence structure is varied with some control. This will then get 11 marks out of the possible 20 awarded. So just over the halfway mark. If we now take another look at the exam criteria, you can see then that this comes out as an overall high grade 4 response. So just over the halfway mark on the marking criteria. Now let's move on to focus on a different response. This one clearly has the addresses at the top that were correctly punctuated. The date is in the right place and it starts with Dear Mrs. and obviously the headmistress's name. Once more, we see a short, concise introduction, but the vocab range here is slightly higher than the previous student. It refers directly to the target audience, as you know, and it uses commas correctly in that complex sentence. Overall, immediately you'll notice this seems a lot more formal than the last response. It is in fact just simply better written for the target audience and the situation or purpose described. Moving on, we can see yet again we have the word firstly appearing there, showing basic structure. But we can see here, yes, there are one or two errors, but these are with slightly more complex vocabulary than the last answer. Also, in addition, you can also see that this response is a little bit more formal and equally is just simply better constructed than the last one. It has really thought through the target audience and think what might appeal most to them. We have a couple of embedded subordinate clauses there to make sure the sentence range is a bit more high level than the previous response. But the basic paragraph openings there are very similar, firstly and secondly. As we move on, we're now beginning to see a much more detailed response. You can see that they've begun suggesting possible alternatives to the task set, and the vocab range and sentence structure is consistently high. They respond there to that middle paragraph with lastly, comma, again indicating clear structure and development of ideas. You can see it's well written, they've thought through the purpose, and they've continually linked to the target audience and gone into a lot more detail in terms of the points they make and why they're making them. In conclusion, comma, my arguments show there's no need for removal of the end of year celebration, deliberately links the conclusion there back to the task set and indeed back to their own introduction. As this answer draws to a close then, you can see it links to the target audience's prime interest, in this case GCSEs, and they give a polite yet formal response to the end of their letter. Yours sincerely, and obviously the name and then Year 11 student. Once more, you can see the exam board's comments at the bottom. Good understanding of purpose of the intended reader, content is detailed with points to support opinions well developed, and secure control with few comparative errors compared with the grade 4 response. This then is awarded them with a mark of 16 out of 20. Once more, let's have a look at the mark scheme and see where that fits in. Well, that would mean this candidate then gets a grade 7 for their letter. It is better constructed, it shows clear and developed understanding of purpose, and many of the points made are well judged and fairly detailed. The ideas are organised and coherently developed, and vocabulary is in places ambitious and used with precision. Spelling is more or less secure, and a range of punctuation is used overwhelmingly accurately with comparatively few errors. Now let's take a look at the third response, and you can tell immediately here that this is probably the weakest of the three. The addresses have not been written in full at the top, and we have there a very short basic introduction which is one sentence long. It tells that I am writing this letter to, which is a key indicator of a very basic response to a letter writing task. Once again though, the connectives firstly are used for that first paragraph. But as we now read this through, we can see it's not really trying that hard to be formal, and equally it seems to be a lot less targeted towards a headmistress. You can see it says it would be very selfish or unfair of you to take away such a special event to so many of us. That's a very basic response and is almost ill thought through in terms of the task being set. We move on through this response. You can see some effective word choices, but with very bad spelling. And as we look through, there's very few commas being used. This student either doesn't know how to use commas, or indeed is just not thinking about their sentence construction. Moving to the end of this response, you can see most of the paragraphs are very short, consisting of 1 or 2 sentences for the most part. And you can see the really informal, so please sir, please rethink your decision. This would not form part of a letter to headmaster or headmistress. It is simply too informal and not really suited to the style of writing required for this assessment. It thanks them in a sentence at the end there and gives a fairly weak response to the task set. The word sincerely is spelt wrong at the bottom, and the exam board yet again found it shows understanding of purpose, some shape and structure, but some uneven control of its sentence construction. As a grade then, this would have a mark of 8 out of 20, which would give it a grade 3 overall. This would then come in that band 2 criteria with only some awareness of purpose and format shown, some attempt to purpose and audience, limited development of ideas, and lacks clarity and fluency overall. There is some variety of sentence structure in that they have used sentences, but the lack of commas and range of sentence construction leaves it no higher than the band 2. Thank you very much then for listening to this guide to Paper 2, Section B of Transactional Writing in the English Language GCSE, and this is how then letters are assessed. Thank you for listening.